My name is Natalie Green, 38 years old. I've seen a lot of things: war zones, mass evacuations, backstabbing politics within the Department of Defense. But nothing prepared me for the moment when my brother-in-law slapped my 7-year-old daughter across the face at a Christmas dinner table full of people who said nothing.
I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I just looked at Lily, her little face stunned, her cheek reddening. And in that moment, I knew. You hit the wrong girl, Derek, because you just gave me permission. If you've ever been the scapegoat in your own family, the one they whisper about behind fake smiles, the one they pretend never quite belonged, stick around. This isn't just my story. It might be yours too. Before we dive deep, I want to say this. If you've ever been gaslit by your own blood, if you've ever sat at a table where every chair was taken, but none were meant for you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're ready for 30 minutes of painful truth, beautiful revenge, and the exact moment I took my power back on national television. Because this isn't a pity story. It's a warning to the outside world. The Greens were the model American family. Dad, Harold Green, was a retired naval officer turned professor, stoic, well-dressed, and utterly absent emotionally. Mom, Eleanor, was the kind of woman who hosted charity galas but couldn't say "I'm proud of you" if her life depended on it. And then there was Amber, my younger sister, Ivy League, cello prodigy, wedding designer for celebrities. The shining daughter. Me, I was the intense one, too serious, unfeminine. I chose West Point over Wellesley, military over marriage. And I paid for it in silence, the kind that hums beneath every fake family photo. I left home at 18 and rarely looked back, but no matter how far I climbed captain, major, general, they always managed to look unimpressed. Family dynamics, layered detail. I remember one Thanksgiving, a few years ago. I'd just returned from my 3rd tour in Afghanistan. I'd flown 18 hours with no sleep, just to make dinner on time. Amber greeted me at the door and said, "Mom's in a mood. Try not to mention the whole combat thing. She thinks it's too much." Too much, she meant me. Even my promotion to Major General only earned a passing nod. "Glad you're doing well," Dad had muttered over his newspaper, as if I'd just won a game of Scrabble. So when I had Lily, after leaving my ex-husband, a man not unlike my father, I told myself, she will never feel unwanted in her own home. But I also made a quiet, impossible wish. Maybe one day, the Greens will see me through Lily's eyes, and they'll realize what they missed. Decision to return. That's what brought me back to the lake house last Christmas. Amber had sent a formal evite titled "The Green Family Legacy Holiday." It was so on brand I nearly laughed. But then Lily peeked over my shoulder and said, "Do I get to meet Mommy's family?" I hesitated. Truth was, I didn't want her to meet them, but I didn't want to pass down my wounds either. So I RSVP'd yes, packed the car with a homemade apple pie, a bottle of Cabernet, and a snowflake sweater for Lily. And the smallest, most breakable thing of all hope. Arrival, the foreshadowing. When we pulled into the circular drive of the Vermont lake house, snow was falling in that soft, storybook kind of way. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, laughter. But the moment we stepped into the entryway, the cold returned. Amber looked up and said, "Oh, you actually came!" No hug, no hi, Lily. Just the kind of smile people save for coworkers they secretly resent. Eleanor emerged from the parlor like a queen arriving late to court. She air-kissed the air near my cheek and nodded toward my daughter. "Who's this tall little girl?" "This is Lily," I said. "Your granddaughter." Eleanor blinked. "Oh, right." First red flags at dinner. By 7 p.m., the long mahogany table was set for 12, linen napkins, crystal glasses, exactly 0 warmth. Lily reached for a bread roll, and Eleanor snapped, "We wait until everyone is served." "Dear," Amber chimed in. "She's cute. Reminds me of Natalie when she wasn't barking orders." They laughed. I smiled tightly, taking Lily's hand under the table. Then came Derek, Amber's husband, a stockbroker with all the self-awareness of a barbell. He raised his glass and said, "To family, even the ones who thought combat boots were a good life plan." Lily, bless her bold heart, looked up and asked, "Do you always talk down to women when you feel small?" The room fell dead silent, and Derek, a grown man, slapped my daughter across the face. Internal reaction: the freeze. I froze, not because I was weak, but because my brain short-circuited from sheer disbelief. This man, this smug, second-tier finance bro, had just hit a child, my child, and everyone just looked away. Amber stirred her wine. Eleanor cleared her throat. Harold kept chewing. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but her spine stayed straight. And I didn't scream, didn't call 911. Instead, I said, "Lily, would you like to go upstairs and read?" She nodded. And that night, I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep that night. Lily did, barely curled under the same thick blanket I once used as a child in that same room, her little body tucked neatly, her cheek still slightly red from where Derek's hand had struck her. I sat at the edge of her bed, phone clutched in my palm, my thoughts split down the middle. One part of me wanted to pack our things and leave before sunrise. The other part, the colder, steadier part, whispered, "No. Not this time. You don't walk away again without leaving something behind." My chest burned, but no tears came. I'd held soldiers in my arms while bombs still echoed in the air. I'd taken responsibility for the failure of an entire unit when one wrong call cost us too much. I didn't break back then, and I wasn't about to break now, not because of linen napkins and Cabernet faked smiles. But the truth was, for the first time, I didn't know where to begin. The next morning, breakfast unfolded like nothing had happened. Eleanor sifted flour into a mixing bowl, humming about her upcoming green heritage-scented candle launch in the spring. Amber was buried in her laptop, editing a vineyard wedding layout. Derek sat silently, flipping his newspaper with that nauseating calm of a man who thinks he's untouchable. I walked in holding Lily's hand, gripping it maybe too tight, though I wasn't sure if I was holding her or holding myself together. No one mentioned the slap. Not a word, not a glance of remorse, just the same curated coldness. I poured Lily some milk and, loud enough for all to hear, I said, "I want to speak with everyone after breakfast." Eleanor looked up like I'd just defiled the family crest. "About what, Natalie?" I stared right back. "About how a grown man hit a child across the face last night, and all of you sat there like museum wax figures." No one said a word after that. The air thickened not with guilt, but with the discomfort of being forced to look at something ugly they'd rather pretend didn't exist. After breakfast, I took Lily for a walk around the frozen lake. The snow had crusted into a thin sheet of glass across the water. She held my hand, silent for a long time, then suddenly asked, "Mom, if we stay quiet, does that mean we're wrong?" I stopped. "No, baby. But if we stay quiet forever, the people who are wrong start to think they're right." She nodded slowly. That answer wasn't just for her. It was for me, too. When we got back to the house, I noticed an email in my inbox from an unknown Gmail address. No subject line, just an audio file labeled "Christmas Dinner, Behind the Scenes." I played it. My breath caught. It was a recording, about 10 minutes long. I recognized Paul's voice, Linda's husband, the soft-spoken, camera-in-hand brother-in-law who always recorded holidays for posterity. In it, I heard everything. Eleanor's voice. Natalie is just a prop the military uses to check a diversity box. Derek's laugh. She raised a girl even more mouthy than she is. Amber. Of course, she should be grateful we let her sit at this table. They didn't know they were being recorded, but Paul knew. And at the end of the clip, his voice quietly muttered, "Saving this. In case she ever needs the truth." Below the audio, the email simply read, "I'm sorry I stayed quiet for so long." I sat still. Not because I was surprised. I'd always known what they thought of me. But for the first time, I had proof. Unfiltered, undeniable, damning proof. No one could spin it. No one could lie their way around it. That night, I stayed awake for the second night in a row, but not in pain. This time, I was planning. I pulled out my old contact list names from deployments past, friends who had moved into journalism, documentary production, policy advocacy. I sent them the recording, along with a short message. If you're looking for an unfiltered example of generational narcissism and emotional abuse, this is a textbook case. Within 12 hours, I had a response. One colleague, now a senior producer at a major media outlet, offered to run a segment titled "The Invisible Wounds of Family Silence." Featuring my story, I declined. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted something bigger. I called General Cooper, my former commander, now head of the Office of Veteran Honor Recognition at the Pentagon. Years ago, he had offered to present me with a Distinguished Civil Service Medal after a mission in Syria, which I had quietly declined back then. I didn't want attention at the time. This time was different. I sent him the audio. 1 hour later, he texted, "I understand. I'll take care of it." 3 days later, I told Eleanor we had to leave early due to urgent military business. She didn't ask questions. Amber only offered a shallow, "Good luck with the army stuff." Derek gave me a smug half-wave, like a man dismissing a waitress. They had no idea. In 7 days, their voices would be broadcast to millions. Their words, their cruelty, no longer protected behind linen and wine and holiday cheer. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to burn bridges. I just needed to wait and let the world do the rest. On the plane, Lily rested her head against my shoulder. She whispered, "Mommy, do you think Grandma will watch TV on Friday?" I smiled. "She will," I said. "And so will Amber. And Derek. And every single person who ever believed I didn't belong. But before the world watched me rise, I had to prepare the stage. A stage without flowers, without champagne, without anyone who ever called me too much. Just applause from the people who knew the value of silence and justice. We landed in D.C. just after sunset. Snow still hung heavy in the air, but everything about this cold felt different. It didn't sting the same way Vermont had. It didn't sit beneath the skin like a parasite pretending to be family. No, this cold was clean, purposeful, and oddly comforting. I held Lily's hand as we stepped through the arrival gates. A black car was waiting. Government plates. Driver in uniform. Lily's eyes widened as the soldier opened the back door and saluted me with crisp precision. "Welcome back, General Green." That was the first time she'd ever heard someone call me that out loud. I glanced down at my daughter, and I could almost see the thoughts racing behind her big brown eyes. Mommy isn't just my hero. Other people see it too. And that realization would grow to be one of the most powerful parts of this entire journey. But I didn't say anything yet. There were still steps ahead. One in particular that required perfect timing. The next day was a whirlwind of dress rehearsals, briefings, camera tests, and protocol checks. This wasn't just an award ceremony. This was a nationally televised event hosted at the Kennedy Center, attended by senators, veterans, survivors, military families, and yes, journalists, the Department of Veterans Affairs, had decided to reintroduce a public recognition ceremony to spotlight overlooked service and character, and someone had made sure I'd be the centerpiece. That someone, I later learned, was General Cooper himself, a man of few words, but impeccable timing. He'd watched that audio clip from the lake house, and in his words, the American public needs to hear a different kind of war story, one that starts in a dining room. I had agreed on one condition: that the audio wouldn't be leaked beforehand. I wanted it played once live, raw, and irreversible with the camera fixed on me. That night, I lay in bed next to Lily, reviewing the final program on my tablet. My speech was only scheduled for 5 minutes, but it was more than enough. Every syllable had been sharpened, every pause calibrated. I wasn't going to rant, I wasn't going to sob. I was going to do what my family could never do: face the truth with grace and composure. I didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was readiness. The day of the ceremony arrived crisp and clear. I wore my uniform, not the newer cuts they use for PR photos, but my older dress blues, complete with the creases and ribbons earned during deployments. A quiet storm of history stitched into every inch. As we entered the green room backstage, one of the event producers approached me, half nervous, half awestruck. "Ma'am, just confirming, are you sure about including the personal audio? We can cut it if I stopped him with a look. No cuts, play it straight. They'll hear exactly what I heard." I took the stage at 7:44 p.m. The applause was thunderous, but I didn't smile. I stood still, nodded once, and walked to the podium. The room fell into silence, the way a battlefield does just before first contact. I opened with the line that had echoed in my mind for weeks. Some wars are fought with guns. Others are fought at dinner tables. I've survived both. A few people shifted in their seats. Some smiled, expecting a metaphor. But the weight of what came next would turn every smirk into stone. I spoke briefly about my military career, about missions that taught me courage, loss, and quiet leadership. Then I paused, pressed a button on the podium, and nodded to the tech team. The audio began to play. The room heard it all. Eleanor's polished venom, Derek's toxic pride, Amber's gleaming contempt, their voices, recorded over the scent of cranberry sauce and roast duck, played in haunting detail across the pristine auditorium. Gasps, frowns, one audible whisper. Oh my God. And still, I didn't flinch. I simply stood there, watching the audience hear what I had lived with in silence for most of my life. When the clip ended, I let the silence hang. Then I said, "There are people who will never be held accountable because they hide behind the word family. But abuse dressed in tradition is still abuse, and silence does not equal respect. I'm not here to disgrace anyone. I'm here because truth deserves its own uniform." The room exploded in applause. Not the polite kind, not the choreographed kind, but the kind that rises from the gut, from a place where people feel seen. Somewhere, I thought, maybe someone like me is watching and choosing to speak next time. Backstage, journalists waited. I gave no interviews. Lily hugged me so tightly, I felt the metal press between us. Her eyes were shining. "Proud," she whispered. "I liked when you said the truth wears a uniform," I whispered back. "So do you." But as beautiful as that night was, it was only the beginning of the ripple. Because the next day, every major news outlet carried the story, "Decorated General Exposes Family Abuse and National Address." The clip went viral. I wasn't even on social media, but my inbox flooded. Messages from strangers, soldiers, survivors, daughters, sons, people who had been shamed into silence, people who had swallowed their voice for peace that never came. Among the emails was one from Natalie Derek's wife. Just a subject line I heard everything. No body text, no apology, just that. But I didn't need more. Because a week later, I got a notice from her attorney. She had filed for divorce. On the grounds of domestic volatility. She had attached the recording as evidence. Derek wouldn't be smirking anymore. Paul, bless him, sent me a message that simply said I should have done more, but I'm glad I did something. I wrote back, "You did enough. That audio file wasn't just a dagger, it was a mirror." As for Eleanor, Amber, and the rest of them, the silence was deafening. No response, no statement, no "we were misrepresented," because what could they say? Their voices were the evidence. Their own words, uncensored, unedited, had done what decades of emotional labor could not. They proved me right. But the most poetic part wasn't in the headlines. It was in Lily's drawings. One night, she handed me a sketch she'd made in school. It was a stick figure in a uniform, standing on a stage, with little stars drawn overhead. I asked, "Is this me?" She shook her head. "No, it's me one day." I didn't cry. I just hugged her, tight, because I knew she would never doubt herself the way I did. And if she ever faced a room full of polished monsters in nice suits, she'd know exactly how to win without raising her voice. I expected a reaction, not just from the public, from them, from Eleanor, from Amber, from Derek. Some rebuttal, some denial, some spin about context or misunderstanding. But instead, nothing. Total silence. No emails, no phone calls, no public statements. It was like the family just folded inward. And in a way, that silence said everything. Because what can you say when the entire world has already heard you at your worst unedited, unmasked, and undeniably cruel? The ripple effects didn't stop at headlines. Derek's firm placed him on indefinite leave, pending a formal review of conduct unbecoming. The audio alone was enough to trigger an HR nightmare they didn't want smoke from. Clients pulled contracts. Amber tried to play neutral, but when the wedding board started circulating the clip and connecting it to her personal brand, booking slowed, fast. One client posted, "If she treats her sister like that, how does she handle a stressed bride?" The kind of backlash money can't buy your way out of. As for Eleanor, she canceled her spring candle launch. Green heritage was dead in the water. Too many people had seen her heritage for what it really was, gilded cruelty wrapped in linen and passive aggression. But what surprised me more wasn't their collapse. It was mine. Not a breakdown, but an unraveling. Quiet, strange, subtle. Like I'd taken off armor I didn't know I'd been wearing. For weeks, I found myself waking up at 3 a.m. with no clear reason. Not in panic, not in fear, just aware, hyper-aware. Like my body was catching up to what my soul had finally said out loud, "It's over." One night, I sat in the kitchen while Lily slept upstairs, and I caught myself staring at the refrigerator magnet that read, "You are enough." I'd bought it years ago, in some airport gift shop, more as a joke than a mantra. But in that moment, I finally believed it. Not because the world clapped, not because the headlines liked me, but because I had stopped needing any of it. That, more than the revenge, was the beginning of true freedom. But peace always has a cost, and sometimes that cost comes in unexpected ways. A few weeks later, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. But I recognized the cursive immediately. It was from Eleanor. It wasn't an apology. Not really. She didn't use words like sorry or I was wrong. That would have been too clean, too human. Instead, she wrote, "I suppose there's no point pretending now. You've won your war. If you were looking for love, I'm afraid I never had the kind you needed. But I did. in my own way. Respect your strength. Maybe that's the closest I ever got to pride. I read it twice, then again, and then I burned it. Not out of hatred, but out of necessity. Because for years, I'd carried around the burden of wanting something she couldn't give, and I refused to spend one more second trying to decode her iciness into affection. The moment the flame consumed the last curl of paper, I felt something inside me let go. A space opened. Not empty, just finally mine. But letting go of her didn't mean letting go of everything. A week later, I took Lily to the lake one last time. Not to the house, we didn't step foot near that, but to the water. We walked along the edge, where snow met slush, and she pointed to the horizon. This was where I got scared. She said softly. I nodded. But you didn't run, I replied. She looked up at me, serious. Neither did you. We stood in silence for a while. Then, before we left, I took out a small box from my coat pocket. Inside it was my original military name tag, the one I wore in my first deployment. I handed it to her. Why, she asked. Because you're the first person I ever fought for who could still grow up different. Her fingers closed around it slowly. I didn't cry, but something inside me broke in a beautiful way. Back home, life didn't transform overnight. I didn't become a motivational speaker. I didn't sign a book deal or launch a podcast. I went back to structure, routine. I took a small consulting role with a nonprofit that supports veterans transitioning to civilian life. Nothing flashy, just quiet, steady work. But in that quiet, I noticed something strange. People started coming to me, not with applause, but with stories. Daughters, sons, women, men, survivors of things never spoken at family tables. They shared things they'd kept buried. Because now they had a point of reference. They had a name, a speech, a moment they could attach their pain to and say, "See, I wasn't crazy." That became my legacy. Not medals, not headlines, but being the proof that silence doesn't have to be the cost of love, that you can love your family, mourn them, and still walk away. That survival isn't always about escape. Sometimes, it's about staying just long enough to tell the truth, and then stepping out with your head high. But I'd be lying if I said I never looked back. Sometimes, when Lily's asleep, and the house is too quiet, I wonder if Amber ever listens to that clip again, if Derek rewinds his words in his head, if Eleanor, in her candle-lit silence, ever feels the difference between being feared and being remembered. I wonder. Then I stop wondering, because wondering is just another kind of waiting, and I'm done waiting. One morning, Lily came down for breakfast, wearing my old dog tags like a necklace. She poured her cereal like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Can I bring these for show and tell?" I raised an eyebrow. "You think second graders are ready for that kind of story?" She shrugged. "I'll just tell them my mom was a general. But, more importantly, she wasn't afraid to leave the wrong table." I smiled, not because it was cute, but because it was true. That's the story, isn't it? That's what this has always been about. Not revenge, not victory, not headlines, just the quiet power of choosing yourself, choosing the people who choose you back, and learning, finally, that sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is walk away without needing anyone to follow her. There's a strange thing that happens when you finally stop fighting for the wrong people to understand you. The world doesn't get smaller, it gets clearer. Like fog lifting after a storm, revealing the coastlines that were always there, just waiting for you to stop sailing in circles. That's what my life became after the fallout, after the award ceremony, after the silence from the people who once had the most power to hurt me. Clarity, not perfection, not constant joy, but something quieter, stronger, honest. I still get asked why I did it. Why I exposed them, Why I went public with something so private. And every time, my answer is the same: because I needed to be free. Because silence, for me, wasn't just survival, it was self-erasure. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I wasn't even trying to punish them. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere other than my body. And once it did, I finally had room to breathe again. People assume revenge has to be loud, that it needs to burn bridges, flip tables, make headlines. But what I learned is that real revenge, the kind that heals, instead of poisons, is just telling the truth, calmly, clearly, without asking for permission, because the moment you stop needing someone else to validate your pain, you've already won, even if they never say sorry, even if they pretend it never happened. The truth, once spoken, doesn't need their consent to be real. But that doesn't mean it's easy. Healing, contrary to every self-help slogan, is not a straight line. It's jagged. It doubles back on itself. Some days you feel powerful. Other days you remember something, just a word, a look, a tone, and suddenly you're 10 years old again, trying to make yourself smaller in a room that was never built to hold you. But the difference now is, you know how to walk out of that room. You know the way back to yourself. And that's everything. In the months that followed the ceremony, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my understanding of what family really means. Because blood never protected me. Uniforms did. Friends did. My daughter did. Family, I learned, isn't who you share a name with. It's who claps when you win and stands beside you when you don't. It's who sees your scars and doesn't flinch. And sometimes, it's the people you meet far after the damage has been done, the ones who look at you not as someone broken, but as someone brave enough to have survived. Lily asked me once, "Do you miss them?" I didn't lie, I said. I miss the version of them I used to wish was real. She nodded slowly, not as a child, but as someone who already knew what it felt like to be let down by people you love. Then she said something I'll never forget. I think wishing hurts more than leaving. And she was right. That was the thing that kept me tied to them all those years, not love, not loyalty, not duty, just the wish, the endless, exhausting hope that maybe one day they'd see me, respect me, choose me. But when I finally stopped wishing, I finally got free. Sometimes people ask, what would you say to them now, if you could? And honestly, nothing, not out of bitterness, but because there's nothing left to explain. My silence is no longer fear, it's peace. I don't need to rewrite the past. I don't need them to agree with my version of the story, because it's not a version, it's the truth. And the truth doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it just waits. And when the time is right, it rises. I still wear the medal sometimes, not for the recognition, but as a quiet reminder of everything it took to stand on that stage. Every suppressed memory, every dismissive glance, every night I lay awake wondering if I was the problem. It's not a trophy. It's a scar, polished and public, and I wear it the way all survivors wear their stories, not proudly, but with purpose. Because someone, somewhere, still hasn't found their voice, and maybe seeing mine will help them find it. But more than the medal, more than the speech, it's the small moments that have meant the most. Sitting with Lily as she reads, walking through the grocery store without that invisible weight on my shoulders, laughing, really laughing without checking who's watching. Not everything is cinematic. Not everything ends with applause. But every moment now is mine. Not filtered through someone else's judgment. Not twisted by family politics. Just real and mine. And I guess that's the lesson I want to leave behind. That survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about reclaiming your life. that justice doesn't always come in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes, it's just one woman standing on a stage saying, "This happened." Sometimes, it's telling your story before they can rewrite it. Sometimes, it's choosing your peace over their comfort. And sometimes, it's walking away without leaving a forwarding address. If you're watching this, and your story feels familiar, if you've ever sat at a table where your name was known, but your presence was unwanted, know this: you are not alone. You are not invisible. And you are not crazy for wanting more than survival. You deserve more, not because of what you've endured, but because of who you are in spite of it. So here's what I'll leave you with. Tell your story, even if your voice shakes, even if no one claps, even if no one believes you yet. Speak anyway. Stand anyway. Love yourself enough to walk away when staying is just a slow kind of dying, because the world is watching, and someone, somewhere, is waiting to see what survival really looks like. Let them see you, all of you. And when you walk out of that room, the one where they only let you in so they could sit you in the shadows, don't look back. Don't ask why. Just close the door behind you. Then find a new table. And build one where everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet finally gets to speak.